safe, intimate space where people from different background, culture, and nationality can come together and really connect, share, and learn from our own life stories. So for tonight, we have our amazing Marty as our guest speaker, who will be taking us to the world of sound studies. So hopefully tonight we get to spend some great time together, learning and getting inspired and sharing. So yeah, on that note, I'll let you take the floor and enjoy.
Yeah. There it is. I'm going to use a microphone. Is that all right? Any objections to the microphone? Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is a really nice little intimate space. I kind of feel like I should stand up. I don't know. I'm going to be standing and sitting and whenever. Whenever I talk in front of people, I like to stand up. But I feel like this is more of a comfortable talk than a standing talk. Anyway, thanks for coming to YL Invites number 3. Today's topic is Introduction to Sound Studies, which I'll explain about further on. My name is Marty Hicks. First of all, I'd just kind of like to give it a little breakdown of the kind of thing I'll be doing today. Mostly talking, I think, but I'll be playing some of my stuff and whatever. I'm going to start with like a little bit of a self-introduction, who I am and whatever. And then as we move into chapter 2, I'm going to give like a brief overview of this thing we call sound studies, which is kind of a pretty broad topic, but mostly involves the study of sound, as it were. Chapter 3 is, I've titled it On Sonic Creation, but it's specifically about my sonic creation. So the kind of sounds I make and the kind of music I make and that kind of thing. And then if we have time at the end, I'd like to kind of play some music or make some music real time. And then at the very end, we're going to have a question and answer session. Where you can ask whatever you like, and then after that, it'll be mingling or whatever. So, hopefully it'll kind of flow naturally into one another. で、今日は基本的に英語で発表するっていうことになってるんですけど、ちょっと日本語もお願いしますって言われたので、必要のちで日本語も喋ろうかなと思っています。わからないことがあれば、聞いても全然いいので、聞いてください。ちょっとね、いつ英語喋ればいいのかとか、いつ日本語喋ればいいのかわからないからあれなんですけど、ちょっと頑張ります。Alright, so this is me in I can't remember the name of that park, but this is actually a YL production. Kim Marcello, is Kim here tonight? He's not here. He didn't come. Oh man. He's here in spirit, yeah. This is a photo by Kim Marcello, who does a lot of work for YL, and this was on a project we did for Bombay Sapphire, which some of you might have seen. If you go to the YL page, you'll probably see similar photos. But that was taken, and I don't know. I really like the photo, so I put it there. But basically, this is a really kind of bare bones rundown of who I am and where I come from and that kind of thing. Not that where you come from really matters, but so I guess I introduce myself most often as a sound creator or I guess like a composer most of the time. I work with sound, and that's pretty broad. Like I've kind of grown into this person that does a lot of different sonic sort of stuff. So it's hard for me to say exactly what I am in one word, but I often use this term sound creator. And I know even in Japanese, like this is kind of used quite a bit. Sound creator とかね. So within that, like personally, like this is the 3 kind of biggest realms of sound that I work with: composition, sound design, and the piano. Initially, I was like originally a piano player, like just a piano player, but then I kind of started composing more, and then composition led me to sound design. I'll give more information about that later, but I'm a sound creator first and foremost. Just on my like academic history, I'm from Melbourne, and I studied piano back in Melbourne, and my major was improvisation. They don't call it jazz at the well, at the time it was the Victorian College of the Arts, but they kind of hesitate. They're a bit of a kind of left wing, not left wing, left of centre kind of university at the time, and the degree was called Bachelor of Performance Improvisation, and yeah, we did some jazz, but it was very very broad and whatever. But yeah, so I majored in piano there, and then after that, like I started studying Japanese and. One thing led to another, and I ended up doing a master's at Tokyo University of the Arts, or Tokyo Geijutsu Daigaku. And there, I studied in this department called Musical Creativity and the Environment. In Japanese, it's called Ongaku Onkyo Sozo. ね、学部が音楽環境創造で、大学院が音楽音響創造っていうすごくややこしい学科なんだけど、yeah, so I studied like film music mostly, I guess there, but more sort of like I did like installations and that kind of thing, and so then that kind of brings us to recently 2020 onwards, I started working at Senzoku Gakuen College of Music, and yeah, this forms like most of my income, I guess, at the moment. I recently became like a full-time lecturer at this university, and the department is called Music Design. The Japanese name is Ongaku Onkyo Design. And yeah, there I teach the stuff that I'm going to be speaking about today. So I'm not going to speak too much about that, but yeah, I'm really enjoying teaching at this university at the moment. ここまで大丈夫でしょうか? All right, so now that that's gone and done with, in order to start speaking about sound studies, we need to start listening, I think, is the first and foremost thing to do. So right now, I'd like to do a little bit of a listening exercise where we just listen to this current environment. I'm not going to do it for very long because if it gets too long, it gets a little bit awkward. But I'd like everyone just to listen for about a minute or two to the sounds that are happening right here and right now. So it's probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable because, a lot of strangers in this room and that kind of thing. But embrace it, just listen, and then afterwards we'll talk about it and think about what we heard. Okay, let's begin. How's that? Uncomfortable? It's quite an interesting thing to walk in on, I think, the whole kind of listening exercise. Yeah. I forgot to mention beforehand, you can make noise. Like it's, you don't have to do anything different than what you're usually doing, other than just listen or focus on listening. So, What do you think? About how many times does everyone here do that in their day-to-day life? Or, how many times a week? How many times a month? How many times do you consciously focus on the act of listening and hearing what's going on around you? Personally, I don't do it very much. I should, but I don't. And I'm sure that probably most of us don't spend a whole lot of time just doing that, However, as you might have found just then, there's a lot to listen to and there's a lot to hear. And a lot of it you don't think about, you don't pick up on just when you're doing your thing, doing your socializing or whatever. So just that just listening is kind of opens the Pandora's box, I think, in many ways. And I kind of it feels weird to say like I came across that and it kind of changed my life, but it kind of did. It was like just the idea of slowing down and listening and doing nothing but listening kind of got me addicted to listening. And the conscious act of listening and putting it into practice came to me like pretty late in my career, I guess. Not that my career is kind of ending or anything, but I played piano and was involved in music. I started playing when I was about 6 years old, and my dad's a drummer, and so I've always kind of been around music, and it's always kind of been this thing I haven't taken it for granted, but I've never really thought about just kind of not like hearing things and listening to things without judging them, and when I started to do that, just kind of things within me changed, and it really kind of informed the kind of things that I do with my work and that kind of thing. Anyway, I could speak a lot about it. I will, but I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. So just here, I'd like to introduce this person, Pauline Oliveros. And what we just did, I guess you could say that that's one of her pieces of music. We all just performed that together. We were all part of a work that you could say she created, but no one really created listening unless you are agnostic or something. But there is this piece that I feel like is similar, only we didn't start with it. We're kind of ending with it, so we're doing it back to front. But this piece, Earpiece, which is just a list of questions. And I'll explain a little bit more about Pauline Oliveros and her practice a little bit later on. But I just find like things like this a really interesting thing to think about when you listen, but also after you've kind of consciously listened. Are you listening now? Are you listening to what you're now hearing? That's a big one, isn't it? We're hearing a lot of stuff, but how much of it are we listening? How much of it do we need to listen to? Are you hearing while you listen? Are you listening while you're hearing? It's just kind of semantic at this point. I'm not going to try translating this to Japanese. That's ridiculous. Do you remember the last sound you heard before this question? This sound, maybe. What will you hear in the near future? That's an interesting kind of question. Can you hear now and also listen to your memory of an old sound? How do you make a memory of a sound? What causes you to listen? And this can be as broad as possible. It can be specific words in a conversation, or it's a lot you could say about it. Do you hear yourself in daily life? Do you have healthy ears? What does that mean? Don't we all have healthy ears? If you could hear any sound you want, what would it be? It kind of feels like that thing that went viral a while ago about like the best first questions to ask on a first date. How to get someone to fall in love with you on the first date. Ask these questions. Are you listening to sounds now or just hearing them? What sound is most meaningful to you? Anyway, I just find it a really beautiful experience reading her work. And if I'm not sort of feeling like just listening, I find like prompts like this really kind of help to get a little bit more introspective and what have you. Anyway, so we started with a bit of a practical example of what sound studies is or could be. But speaking a little bit more broadly, sound studies is kind of a pretty recent thing. I think it's not as sort of formalized as something like architecture or like psychology or anything like that. But it's gradually starting to become this thing that's being like academically formalized and that kind of thing. It's just tricky because like sound, so many things involve sound. And particularly in the realm of academia and studies and that kind of thing, it's kind of hard to narrow it down to one certain thing, you know. And as you'll find in this talk, I think like even people that work with sound, even like just musicians or whatever, often like aren't really restricted to, you know, the realm of music. You know, it sort of delves into other things. So I kind of made this like big sort of square kind of space. That is dominated by the concept of hearing and listening, which what I mean by that is that things, these studies can be a form of sound studies in a way. So obviously like at the top we've got music and sound art and that kind of thing. I put sound in brackets because like art, you know, kind of involves sound art as well. But music is a given. But things like psychoacoustics and audiology, how sound is kind of delivered or like how sound happens in a space and that kind of thing. Then things like deaf studies and that kind of thing. So we're getting a little bit more towards the medical realm and that kind of thing. So sometimes I feel like I don't need to reiterate this, but using your ears to listen isn't the whole story. If you're a deaf person or if you have capabilities of listening with your ear that are less than people that are able to do that, you can still do the same act of listening. It's just kind of a different bodily experience. Many people are deaf and still pursue sound studies and music and that kind of thing. A lot of incredible composers and musicians are deaf. Biology. So things like plants, study of plants and animals and that kind of thing. Philosophy as well. Architecture. Architecture is a big one recently. Anthropology, so the study of like the history of sound and how sound was perceived by ancient cultures and that kind of thing. Sociology, how we think about sound in our society and that kind of thing. Also business and marketing. This is another one that's kind of getting a lot of coverage recently. Things like sonic branding and that kind of thing. Which I might talk about a little bit later on as well. But basically sound studies is kind of like a form of study that involves a lot of these things, if not all of them, or potentially one of them, kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, so here I've just got a couple of pictures of people that were kind of instrumental in the acknowledgement of sound as a study. The first one is Murray Schafer, who I'll give an explanation on the next slide, and Pauline Oliveras, who we just mentioned in the previous slide. So first of all, Murray Schafer is a person that gets mentioned quite a lot in the sound studies industry. And he kind of they say he coined the term, but I think it might have been someone else earlier, this term soundscape, which some of you might have heard before. And it does get used in a lot of different situations, and it can mean a few different things. But basically, soundscape is it's the same as a landscape, but it's the oral version of it rather than the visual version of it. So what we just did earlier, when we listened to this environment, we listened to the soundscape of this room, essentially. So if we think about what we heard, and let's say maybe like we tried to recreate this space in a different space, what would we have to do? You know, this is the kind of thing that a sound designer might think about. One of them is field recording, which I'm actually doing right now, and listening to the recording in a different place at a different time. Anyway, so Murray Schafer, like he kind of wrote this book called The Tuning of the World in the 70s, and he was the founder of this group. He's Canadian, and I can't remember the university he was situated at, but he made this group called the World Soundscape Project, and he put a lot of effort into the kind of the study of the sonic world and that kind of thing. And so his thing was like, let's record sounds as much as possible, think about them, analyze them, and think about how we can kind of make a visual representation of sound, and so that we can talk about it in other realms other than music and sound. So he was kind of a little bit of an angry old man, and a lot of this kind of like the idea for the soundscape came from his dissatisfaction with how capitalism was making the world a noisier place. So things like the Industrial Revolution and that kind of thing. He goes on. He talks about like kind of all the animals that noise has killed off and that kind of thing, and how detrimental noise is to our society and that kind of thing. But he feels like in order to kind of like communicate effectively about things like that and relay like just how important the idea of sound is, he came up with this thing called a soundscape, and he sort of tends to categorize soundscape with these three different, I guess you'd call them, categories of sound. it's a category in a category. And so he has like there's three different layers of sound called keynote sounds, sound signals, and sound marks. And I really like this concept because like it's a really good way to sift through what you hear in a soundscape and think about like what could be important in that soundscape and what could be filtered out and that kind of thing. So keynote sounds are essentially the sounds that happen in the background. So if we think about like maybe a keynote sound that we heard in the soundscape we just listened to, maybe the projector making the sound, or like my computer fan making a hissing sound, sounds that kind of happen as part of the background, like no specific importance or anything like that. Sound signals are sounds that kind of demand your attention. They happen in the foreground. So things like footsteps and like, like talking and that kind of thing. Someone's trying to get your attention or something like that. Or like a mobile phone notification or something like that. So he calls those sound signals. And then the last one, this is kind of a bit difficult to distinguish to keynote sounds, but sound marks. He bases this off the idea of a landmark. So it's essentially like a sound that is unique to a space or that somehow represents the sonic landscape of that space. So if we were to kind of nominate a sound mark for this space, what do you reckon? I can think of one that just happened. There's a train going overhead. Yeah. So if we were to kind of recreate this soundscape, I think the first thing we would do would put a kind of muffled train sound over the top of it, Yeah. Anyway, so he uses this kind of idea of a soundscape and these three categories, keynote sounds, sounding signals, and sound marks, to kind of document different spaces and different environments, that kind of thing, and think about like what should be protected, what can be disposed of, and just kind of a nice way to think about the sonic environment. And so moving on to Pauline Oliveros. Pauline Oliveros was a composer and accordion player, and I tempted to call her a philosopher because she is incredibly. She wrote a lot of incredibly lucid texts about sound and the mind and the body and that kind of thing. But Pauline Oliveros kind of is associated with this term called deep listening, and I guess we could say Pauline Oliveros coined this term, although she might not say that. She might not. Own up to that. But deep listening. So Pauline Oliveros was kind of really into meditation, and I think this whole deep listening thing came from her practice as a performer. When she was playing accordion with other people, there came a point where she really started to listen to her fellow performers and react organically and that kind of thing. She said that she felt like that really benefited her practice as a performer. But really to kind of like sort of condense down the idea of deep listening and what exactly it is, I mean, it's essentially just listening, but when you think about like, well, why do I need to like sit and listen, do nothing for a while? The idea is to expand your perception of sound. And I feel like this is such a huge thing, and it kind of needs to be emphasized because I wasn't doing this for a very long time. And when I started doing it, like things just changed. I think I started doing this like proactively, like I think it was after I came to Japan in 2015. Maybe just because like the soundscape here in Tokyo is so much different to Melbourne. Like just kind of just listening, you know. And I got so into it that like I feel like I do it a lot these days without even realizing. I think I share a lot of coffee breaks and lunchtimes with my darling wife, and I would just kind of say nothing, but like my mind would just be kind of like, whoa, like, you know, like just sort of, you know, once you kind of like focus on listening and you know, hearing everything there is to hear without judgment, taking your filter off, it teaches you to be a little bit more mindful. I think that's really the key word. And Pauline's thing, it always comes back to mindfulness and the deep listening thing. She was such a what's the word? Such a kind of like proponent. Is that the right word? Proponent of this this act of listening, because she found it had a profoundly positive effect on her body and her health, and it kind of, she felt like it was instrumental in her kind of like you know, well-being and that kind of thing. And I think she's right. I think it's a huge thing just to kind of focus on listening and, you know, and don't use any filters and that kind of thing. So I've kind of been mentioning this word filter, and I think I don't really need to explain what it means or anything like that. But what I mean here by filter is that like the sounds that we, for better or worse, have to filter out in order to live without going insane. And really, like, you know, it's necessary because like there's a lot of things, and I find like Tokyo is the perfect place to learn how to work with your filter, because oh my God, there's so much sonic information everywhere in Tokyo. You know, it's like, I'm sure they're seeing a lot of nodding heads, and it's like, yeah, it's one of the most sonically oppressive environments to be in, I think, maybe in the world. I mean, I haven't been anywhere in the world, but and like, you know, I guess there's places like factories and you know, mines and that kind of thing where sound is kind of a given and you can't really escape it, and it's incredibly loud. But you know, a lot of people live most of their lives in this dangerously loud environment, and I think the way they're okay with it is they just have really strong filters. And so I feel like a lot of people in Japan, a lot of people that work and live in Tokyo have incredible filter abilities to just kind of filter stuff out. And I think I'm talking specifically about sonic stuff, like sound stuff, but it goes for visual stuff as well. However, the biggest thing about like visual filters and sonic filters is that like you can't close your ears, you know? I mean, you could put headphones on or put earplugs in, that kind of thing. That's one way to do it. But even then, it doesn't completely block out the sound, you know? I do find myself like, I use like kind of wireless earbuds, and I listen to music on my commute and that kind of thing. But sometimes I find myself with earbuds in, not listening to anything, like just taking the environmental sound down a little bit, you know. So, I mean, you know, I think everyone here probably has really good filters. Everyone's kind of, you know, living and working and loving in Tokyo, but like, you know, try like taking the filters down for a bit, just kind of like, you know, being still and listening for a while and seeing how you feel about it. And in time, you know, as I said, there are like necessary times we need to use a filter, but yeah, you know, when you use it too much, you can kind of forget how to listen and to hear. And, you know, once you learn how to listen and once you remember to listen and remember to hear, you find a lot of truths, a lot of amazing little nuggets of wisdom that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life, I think. So Pauline's deep listening practices involved these things called sonic meditations, and she wrote a book where it's just like all the meditations, like, you know, one per page. And she used to do kind of retreats and like workshops and that kind of thing. She died very recently, a couple of years ago, I think. But up until she died, she was doing these sonic meditation classes and that kind of thing, mostly with performers. Like a lot of them are kind of performance-based, like you would sing with a group of people and that kind of thing, or just make sound. But they're really amazing. I think the earpiece was one of her sonic meditations, I think. Just kind of ruminations on sound and things you can do to kind of practice listening and that kind of thing. And so this is actually a R. Murray Schafer term. He calls these things ear cleaning exercises, in that like I think it's a lot of it's this filter thing. It's just about kind of, learning to listen and proactively listening and hearing and that kind of thing. And so once you spend time proactively listening, you do feel like you can hear more. You're more aware of sound and that kind of thing. At least that was the case for me, and it really changed the way I approach music and sound. So anyway, so that's kind of So I just had some brief examples about Pauline Oliveros' sonic meditation that I wanted to share with you. I really like this. There's this piece called Native, and it just goes, take a walk at night, walk so silently that the bottoms of your feet become ears. Isn't that amazing? Taking shoes off and going for a walk outside. I mean, maybe it's hard to do in Tokyo, but thinking of your feet as ears is pretty incredible, So then it's like, you're attuned to what the vibrations that are coming through your feet, and you're thinking about them as sound, So then that kind of like could make you think differently about, how sound feels physically and that kind of thing. But really, it's very similar to things like walking meditation and that kind of thing, Recognition. Listen to a sound until you no longer recognize it. It's another interesting one. It's kind of like that thing where you think about a word and you repeat the word in your head, or you keep saying it, and after a while it just loses all meaning. And you start to just hear the sound, And then when you're just hearing the sound of the word, you kind of think about You stop forgetting about what it means or even what it is, and that's where the magic happens, I just feel like all this sort of stuff, like it's like these are like just the most beautiful truths about living and existence, and this is just a way in. Like Pauline Oliveros and Ira Moshe are kind of showing you the door and saying like you want to know about stuff, check it out, Anyway, so just to kind of wrap up the talk about sound studies. These are some things, like some kind of, I guess, semi-rhetorical questions that I think most sound designers ask themselves, or maybe ask in discussions with clients and that kind of thing. Speaking a little bit more practically and that kind of thing, we've learnt about like how listening and hearing is important, but what do we do with that information? We know that it's a great form of meditation and mindfulness, but when push comes to shove and things need to be made and that kind of thing, what do we need to think about in terms of sound studies? So I often kind of start with things like, what role does sound play in our society? And that does word can be interchanged with things like should, will, or could. So what role should sound play in our society? What role will sound play in our society? What role could sound play in our society? It all means completely different things, but it's a really good way to think about putting sound out there, or removing it potentially. So just on that, what about like when does sound become beneficial or harmful? What is harmful sound? What is beneficial sound? For example, like things like UX design and that kind of thing. There's a lot of discussion about calm technology, I think they call it. Have you guys heard about this? Calm technology. Things like designing products and designing technology that doesn't harm the equilibrium of life, I guess you could say. Back in the days of the Industrial Revolution, that kind of thing, it was all about progress and mass production, that kind of thing. But these days, there's a lot of focus on mindfulness and what does it mean to be human, that kind of thing. And so, if you're designing an app or whatever, and you have to think about sound, how can you use sound in a beneficial way that won't be, a negative experience for the user and that kind of thing? When does sound become destructive or restorative? Well, destructive, I don't know about building an office below train tracks, but to some people that might be perceived as, well, maybe not destructive, but maybe like detrimental to working efficiently, that kind of thing, Restorative, well, when you listen to music, you feel good. I guess that's one way to interpret that. When does sound become unnecessary and necessary? I actually wrote a little bit of an article about this for a Yale journal. I like dropping that name. But it was really just a very small thing about necessary and unnecessary sound in a post-COVID world. And there was this whole thing about how when the human noise level decreased, things like was it something like extinct species came back to life or something like that, or like just the ecosystem just rejuvenated itself. And so there was this whole kind of learning experience about like, well, if we remove a lot of the sound that we're making at the moment, there could be untold benefits and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of unnecessary sound potentially. And also I really like this one as well. This is, this forms basically the basis of all my sonic practices. And what does nani nani sound like? And this can be applied to anything, What does the earth sound like? What does a dream sound like? What does compassion sound like? What does understanding sound like, They're all questions that don't have answers, and yet many answers. At the end of the day, all of this comes back to hearing and listening. And I feel like you can't approach any of these questions unless you're first thinking about these two things in a proactive way. Anyway, that's my spiel about sound studies. So having said that, just about the kind of things I do, again, like I don't want to kind of go on and on about this, but when people ask me what kind of stuff do you do, I'm kind of at a loss, but also not. I mean, I have a couple of ready-made answers that I have, but really, this is kind of what I want to show people that ask me this, because for better or worse, like I don't have a niche, I guess. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm so fanatic about sound and music itself that I don't like to shut myself off from anything that's sound related. Like it hasn't always been that way. Like I when I was younger, I definitely had like music that I liked listening to and that kind of thing. But as I grew deeper into sound and that kind of thing, I started to lose that ego and just kind of love everything that has a sound, I think a lot of it comes back to me just sort of losing my, judgments about the sonic environment and that kind of thing, which includes music as well. But basically, we have to start somewhere. So I make music, essentially, music and sound. And of course, music is kind of part of the sound world, so it falls under that category. Everything starts with sound. But basically, I have these three kind of spheres of creation. I make music, I play the piano, and I make sounds as well. And it's a bit of a grey area how much this overlaps, sound and music. But really, I started with music, so that's sort of what I do mainly, I guess. Even within that, there's kind of all these like sub things that I do, and I even feel like I'm kind of whittling it down here. But I basically make this kind of music. So probably the highest concentration of music that I like making under my own name is like ambient music, which I'm hoping to kind of make a little bit later on. But I started with like jazz and classical. So I most of my life has kind of been spent playing jazz, essentially, because I started with the piano. But I'm really into hip hop and beat music and that kind of thing. So I make a lot of beats and that kind of thing. Electronica things like techno and like IDM and that kind of thing. I'm dabbling in that, and I have like a sub project that's kind of a lot to do with this. And also sound art. So I did a lot of this like at Gaydai. Like I did an installation, and I'm really interested in doing kind of things that are a little bit sort of out of pocket, so to speak. Sort of works that are closer to art than music, I guess. And so more or less like things that fall under this music production category and or piano performance. I play mostly like piano is involved in all of these things. When I do live performances, like they can be any one of these. So I had, for example, like this week, for some reason, like I've been kind of on a holiday for months, but this week I have a couple of gigs or a couple of performance things, and Friday night I'm playing ambient music, and then the next day I'm playing jazz music on accordion. So it's just kind of, it's hard to say like I make ambient music, but then like, having someone see me at a jazz gig playing the piano, it's like, it's kind of hard to be concise about it, but that's kind of the music side of it. Down with sound design, like I often kind of differentiate this from music because like a lot of it is technical, I guess. Like a lot of music stuff is pretty sort of subjective and I'm trying to think of a good word, but I can't. But like sounds is kind of like, if I'm making sounds for a film or whatever, and like in the film there's a door closing, I'm not going to play the piano for that. It's like I'm going to play a synth for it. So I feel like this is sort of like the artisanal edge of sonic creation. So things like sonic branding. This is pretty musical, though, I think a lot of the time. But you do have to think about how sound, how it sounds. I'm not explaining this very well. Sonic branding is something that I've kind of been into the past couple of years, and I did some work with YL for a company called SCSK. I'll show you, I think, in the next slide, where I made a sonic logo for that company. Sound effects, so things like Foley, door closing, and dialogue editing, and that kind of thing, and field recording, which is a huge thing I've been doing for many years. Basically, almost everywhere I go, I carry a microphone with me, or like a recorder. And it's usually this one on the table. And I think a lot of you can't see that. But I have this kind of big sort of handy recorder that I take with me. And I just sort of record stuff wherever I go. And my wife waits diligently for me to just kind of stand still and try not to make a sound. So that kind of comes under the field of sound design, because sometimes I need to make ambiances and that kind of thing. As opposed to live performance, a lot of these kind of music production things and sound design things fall into this big category of visual media. So a lot of the works I've done are like film and animation and that kind of thing, as well as like commercials for TV and web, and installations and that kind of thing. So it's very hard to go through that, but that's basically what I do. Just to give you an idea of the kind of sound and music that I make, these are some of the things I've done. I'm not going to play all of them just because of time constraints, but I do. These slides will be available at the end. There's like a QR code. You can download them if you want to check them out. Some of the ambient music I've done, I might just kind of put it on the background. That might be a good idea. This is my website. The Effortless Quiet is kind of, I guess, maybe the most recent kind of like fully blown. Is it going to be really loud? There it is. It's kind of like the most recent release, I guess, I've done. Oh, this is kind of like ambient-y sort of drone-y kind of music. And I also have a record called Aurelian that I made a couple of years ago, and there are CDs here today if you'd like to purchase a copy of that. I might set up like a little listening booth afterwards so you can listen to it if you like. It's mostly this kind of stuff. And then like on like the jazz end of the spectrum, I have an album called Mooncalf. It's kind of old now, but I still work with this project. This is me and a singer. And we just kind of make like original, like, I guess you could call it jazz, but it's very kind of like, I don't know, it's not what you think it is. But it's kind of like vocal sort of stuff. And a lot of it is kind of improvisation and that kind of thing. But it's all kind of piano based.
And it seems to me that this farcical situation is apparent to one as sick as me. It should be apparent to you.
Yeah, this kind of stuff. It's what a lot of what I used to do back when I was living in Melbourne. I also have like this little ensemble that I've kind of quietly been working away at called Francis Bowmore, with bass player Marty Hicks and Kei Matsumoto, sax player. I'll stop that. And then in terms of like media stuff, I've done films and animation, that kind of thing. Alters is a relatively recent short film I did that I really liked working on. There was kind of like this director, Mariana Loretta, has been kind of like a long-time collaborator of mine. And her films are incredible. And this film was kind of a multimedia. It was like a short film, but she collaborated with these dancers and that kind of thing. And it's kind of about like black oppression during lockdown and that kind of thing. Yeah, but it was a really beautiful project. And so I did, for this I did music, but also sound design and dialogue editing and that kind of thing. Everything sonic that happened in this movie, I did myself. Yeah. I'm not sure if that'll get a screen in Japan or not, but yeah, it was a good project. And then I often collaborate with this animator called Soejima Shinobu, who's an old Geidai friend, and she makes incredible kind of like stop motion animation and that kind of thing. So they're kind of like the sort of artistic film realm of the work I do. And then like in terms of commercial stuff, like I did this really nice PR video, I guess you could call, for this company called Kimpei, which is about this old carpenter that lives in Miyake, and he kind of invented this speaker that's made entirely from wood. It's just kind of like a tree stump kind of thing, and he put kind of resonators on it, and yeah, so we went to Miyake and filmed in the forest, and I made a lot of recordings of the environment, that kind of thing. So here again, like everything that's happening sonically, I did, including like the dialogue recording and that kind of thing. And I was really happy with how this turned out. But it's a very much kind of like orchestral kind of vibe, which again is different from like jazz and ambient and that kind of thing. So I find like with film, like it's just kind of whatever is needed, you know? I try to just write whatever the director asks for. Sometimes it's like orchestral stuff, and sometimes it's kind of, you know, rock music and that kind of thing. So yeah, this is the speaker. It's pretty amazing. But then like there's this really beautiful moment at the end where you hear like a woodpecker. It sounds like how many times have you heard the sound of a woodpecker? You know, it's like, so I recorded that at like 5 a.m. in the morning at this shrine in Miyake in the middle of the mountains, and it was like, it was one of those moments where it's just like, I exist, you know. It's like, it was just so profound, and yeah, so that's kind of pretty close to my heart. But and then this one, the SCSK, this is a YL project that I thought turned out pretty well. Just this like kind of, I can't remember what kind of company it was. It was like an IT company, I think, maybe some kind of IT solutions, you know, that sort of company. You know, I mean, yeah. But I made these two Sonic logos for them. Also, this is the page actually on the YL page. If anyone would like to check out the YL page, there's this beautiful, somewhat hard to navigate design. How do I play the video? It's not going to come up, is it? Oh, it's down here, isn't it? Don't need the pictures, so yeah, there we go. Things like that, you know, just kind of 1-2 second kind of jingles. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, very short time length, but like, I think I made, I don't know, like 15 to 20 of those, I think, and then just sort of had to whittle it down, you know. Anyway, so just, yeah, so some of the stuff I've done, but I have a website that you can check out afterwards if you'd like to know more. I'm kind of going to run through the rest of it somewhat quickly, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about my compositional process, in case that's of any interest. And I kind of have like two different shapes, I guess, when I make music, but they more or less kind of are split into these three kind of areas. Sometimes the order is switched, but it goes like left to right most of the time. The foundation part is kind of just kind of getting sounds out, and I think like almost all of the times when I make music, it starts with improvisation. Essentially, I start improvising, and that could be sort of like improvising on the piano, or it could be just kind of like making synth sounds, or like trying to put together different ambiences or whatever. But sometimes I might start with like a concept or an image or whatever. I read a lot and like I watch a lot of movies and I think a lot about stuff that isn't music, and I might kind of get inspiration from somewhere and, you know, feel like that'll inform the kind of sound it'll be. That happens a lot as well. And also themes and motifs, like this is a big one as well. It's kind of the antithesis to improvisation, because I might kind of have like, you know, something like a set of intervals in my mind or something that I, you know, like the sound of, and I just have to sit at a piano and record it, whatever. I recently, like, I've been recording my sleep, and oh my god, I make some sounds in my sleep. It's like I thought about playing some of those recordings tonight, but I don't know. Yeah, I feel like maybe a little bit inappropriate. But sometimes I sing in my sleep. I don't remember any of it, but I might kind of like sing a little bit in my sleep. So sometimes I think about making stuff from my dreams. So after I get sounds out, then it's about like sculpting, really. I call this section like sketching. I'm just kind of like, trying to shape stuff into something coherent. But I do this thing I often call like sound sculpting, which is kind of like, I feel like it's similar to sculpture. You have like a big kind of shape and you have to kind of whittle it down into something recognizable. Another analogy I use a lot is otodzuri, fishing for sound. This is actually, I kind of stole this from one of my Geidai contemporaries. He talked a lot about like when he just makes sounds for the sake of making sounds. It feels like he's fishing, like he's kind of like just like waiting until like he gets hold of something, and he tries really hard to like reel it in. And when he reels it in, he kind of feels like taking a photo of it and showing his friends, that kind of thing. But I really like that analogy, and I think it's really appropriate. Just kind of like spending long hours kind of trying to get something out of this big pool of the abyss of sound, But I think like externalizing is such a huge thing, and I think this doesn't apply just to music and sound. Like I think if you're a creator, if you create anything, externalization is a huge part of what you need to do to make stuff, because I feel like this is the barrier that prevents a lot of people from making anything, and it scares a lot of people, But just getting anything out is a success for me, I think. Just producing stuff, it doesn't matter what it is beneficial. It doesn't matter if you use it or not. Just externalizing whatever's inside you is super important. So I just kind of like getting stuff out. I try not to judge what's happening, With music, like a lot of the time, like you refrain from externalizing because you don't like the sounds you're making. You feel embarrassed and that kind of thing. This happens a lot at my uni where I teach, and it's hard to get people to get past that, but it's such a huge thing. Placement and arrangement is a big thing as well. Like I think that can kind of lead to the last section, but just knowing where to place things and arranging things is a big part of my process. And then the finessing thing is like, for me, like a lot of this is ego, like knowing when to stop, knowing when to say it's finished. And I think like probably a lot of you here could relate to this, but I never feel like anything is finished, But it needs to be finished, and I think like the best finish is whenever you decide to finish it, and so like if you can kind of think about finishing something as just something that you need to do rather than think about too much or work on, it becomes a lot easier, just cutting stuff off. And so I like this idea of letting go, and I'm terrible at this. Like it's been a huge thing. Like I don't hate it, but it's been very difficult for me to feel impartial to things that I make. And so I think, just cutting your losses and like just sort of, abandoning how you feel about something can be like a really good thing. And, there's always a full stop because that's when things finish, but a full stop doesn't necessarily mean the end of the book, There can always be another sentence coming after it. So, once you get a full stop on, it's like, great, moving on, next thing, When I work for other people, not my own stuff, it's more or less the same, but it's just kind of more, I don't know, it's, how do I say this nicely? It's kind of, it's what other people want me to do. I feel like I work, I think about like other people more than myself. This is, my own original stuff is kind of like very introspective and it's very like kind of, self-centered, but when I work for other people, of course, it's like, it's all about them. And I do like that. I like sort of shifting the blame to somewhere else. But I really like kind of listening to other people's visions and making sonic representations of stuff like that. So I like kind of thinking about what does such and such sound like and that kind of thing. and I like this thing as well, forming a sonic palette. People that I've worked with before in this room might recognize this. I often kind of like to just get a few different iterations out first, like a little palette. And I often do that for free. Like I say, like, here's a couple of things that, you know, I've got. Which do you like? Kind of thing. Which color do you like? Yeah, and I feel like that's a really good way to start. And then like bias, I feel like I have a lot to talk about these things, but bias is a huge thing because like you've got to leave it behind when you work for other people. You've got to, I mean, you know, case by case, like there's times when you need to bring like a professional opinion to the field and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people are really thankful to hear like a professional's point of view on something, but especially in Japan, like it's very much kind of like the top kind of, it's whatever the top says goes, you know, and often for better or worse, they're often the least informed. But you know, it is very humbling in that like you need to think about things from other people's perspectives and you know how they could perceive things that you're making and whatever. But then yeah, just the rest is pretty much the same. Like I just kind of iterate stuff. And there's a lot of like improvisation that comes up here, but it's more kind of like experimenting. Like it's sort of informed improvisation. So I think about like what I'm trying to achieve and just try to kind of, you know, it's kind of like throwing pasta at the wall and seeing what sticks, you know. Yeah, and then collaboration is a huge key word with commissioned work as well. Like it's, you know, it's not just collaborating with other sound people. It's you know, designers and that kind of thing. Yeah, and then kind of, you know, there's always revisions and refining and that kind of thing. It's just kind of a very much like a more directed way of making music, I think. Anyway, not to say I one like more than the other, but yeah, it's just kind of an interesting way to think about two different streams of music making. So here I've got like a little live demonstration prepared. Do we have time or what's 5 minutes? Yeah, I can whiz through it. So I just like to do a little thing, very little thing. I won't say like a live performance because what I'm going to do is just show like what my workflow kind of looks like, I guess. Like I can't show too much of it in 5 minutes, but yeah, I'm just going to show you how I might kind of make sounds and that kind of thing. And I might kind of explain a little bit afterwards, but I'm just going to jump in and do it. more or less. Thank you. Very condensed kind of vibe. But that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. ご清聴ありがとうございました。全然日本語喋れなかったんだけど、申し訳ないです。You can find me on these social media outlets. My website is here. Also, if you liked these slides or want to find out more, there's all links all through them and that kind of thing. There's like a reading list here as well. You can download them through this QR code, or I can airdrop them to you. Either is fine. Yeah, and now I think there's going to be a Q&A. So if there are any questions, please ask. 日本語でも全然大丈夫です。The question was, do I make my own contact library? Contact library is a digital instrument, I guess you could say, in layman's terms, where you can create your own instrument by recording something and manipulating it with different programming parameters and that kind of thing. I haven't yet, but I really want to. I've made stuff in other things. Like I've done stuff with Max MSP. Yeah, but no, I haven't yet made my own sample library. I've made a lot of samples, but I haven't kind of implemented it in the shape of a contact patch or anything. This one? This one. Yeah. So this one is called landforms, I think. Yeah, landforms. I was going to show a little bit more of another library from the same company, but this is a company called Slate and Ash, and they make incredible contact libraries. This one is specifically like orchestral instruments, I think. It's all kind of acoustic instruments, and you're given like all this kind of like set of tools to kind of manipulate it and that kind of thing, a lot of granular processing and that kind of thing. But they have another one called Choreographs that I use a lot as well. This one's kind of more synth-based. But some really nice kind of textures you can get in that as well. So Slate and Ash, I recommend if anyone's into VSTs and that kind of thing. Anything else? Mashiko asked what recorder do I use? This one is a, what is it, Tascam, I think? Tascam, I can't remember the name of the model. It's a Tascam, but I also, when I need something smaller, I use a Zoom recorder, Zoom H2, I think. Yeah. Anything else? In terms of like software, like I use Ableton Live, which is this this piece of software. I guess that's what I use when I make sounds, the sculpting, that kind of thing. But like in a little bit more detail, I guess like I use Contact a lot, I suppose. I mean, there's a lot of different things within Contact as well, but I use Contact a lot. But also, what do I use? Yeah, whatever's on hand, really. Like when I do synth-based stuff, I use things like Serum and Faceplan, that kind of thing. But I've been getting into like hardware synths as well. So like I recently have been using a Hydra synth, which I really like. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? The question was talking about externalizing and what is something that beginning sound creators find easy to grasp. Well, I guess it depends really. Like, I mean, if we're talking about kind of someone who wants to do composition and that kind of thing, like imitation, I guess, like kind of like often beginning composers will have like certain types of music that they really like and they really want to make. And so just having that passion and having the drive to create something like that comes naturally, I guess, to them. So I find that a lot of my students like are really good at imitation and that kind of thing, like creating sounds that someone else has done, but doing it really well. And I think that's a very valid thing to be able to do. But yeah, and it's a whole lot of discussion about like, you know, learning how to make your own stuff and that kind of thing. But I find like, yeah, if you are passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work, you know, it doesn't feel like a chore or anything. So you just naturally get good at it, you know. That's what I find. Yeah. What else? Mm-hmm. The question is about visualizing sound. Sound isn't a visual medium, so do I visualize sound and that kind of thing? Sometimes, in a way, like it's very difficult to explain. But I think for a very long time, a lot of where my music comes from is like imagery. But even like imagery is very much kind of like. It's not kind of like a clear image kind of thing. It's sort of more like it's an image associated with a feeling, I guess, you know. But for me, like for some reason, I only really feel like I can communicate what I'm feeling if I'm playing something, like doing music. Like when I play the piano, like I feel like that's me talking, you know. Like I'm not very good at talking and holding conversation, but when I play the piano, it's like, oh, this is what I wanted to say, you know. So it's like, I don't know. I guess that there's some kind of internalization of sound and how I perceive it, but it's not kind of, I wouldn't call it visual. There's definitely a visual element to it. There's an imagery element to it, but I don't think it's that lucid, you know. It's not very clear. Yeah, it's a good question.
So now that AI can like generate sound and music and everything, do you think that, like, what is your opinion of like the role of AI in future sound? Are you against it or?
Yeah, the question's about AI and how I feel about the onslaught of not onslaught, the onset of AI in technology. Yeah, it's a very big question, and it's hard to answer, and I am conflicted about it. But yeah, I think it's just the way I feel about it is probably how a lot of other people feel about it. In that, like, I feel like we're on the precipice of something, and it's either going to be like almost complete and total destruction, or somewhat dystopian. You know? I feel like up until now, it's been pretty like somewhat dystopian. It's kind of teetered on the edge of dystopian. You know, a lot of like what, you know, the direction that tech is going, I feel like is more on the dystopian end of things. But I don't know. It really could go either way, I think. And personally, like I like robots. You know, like I like the idea. I'm a big kind of sci-fi guy, and like I like the idea of you know, AI and that kind of thing in theory. But yeah, it's tricky. And I think for me, like the biggest thing for me is that like I just find AI like really funny. Like, so like AI, things that people produce with AI, I just think are so ridiculous that I laugh at it. You know, like a lot of kind of people are coming out with like films that are made by AI and that kind of thing, but it's just so kind of uncanny valley that's like, this is just a joke, you know? So with music, it's kind of like, my favorite thing is this thing called Open Jukebox. I do kind of follow it a little bit, and Open Jukebox is kind of like, what if like The Offspring sang like Bohemian Rhapsody? I kind of feel like just stupid things like that, and I really like it. Like it's like, you know, it's just because it's such a weird listen. Yeah, I think like things like in my case, like I would be happy if there were things like lyric helpers and that kind of thing. Like if I because I'm not great with lyrics, like if I was stuck with a lyric and I just kind of fed my music and just some concepts to an AI, whatever, and made it write lyrics, it could be really beneficial, I think, to the workflow. So I definitely think there's really good ways that we could adapt it to our current workflow. But yeah, I don't know. Like the most recent thing, I don't know if you've seen this, but like on TikTok, there was a thing about this guy, this white dude, like doing like a voice changer, and he changed his voice to Kanye, and he's like, yeah, that was actually me singing. And it's like, okay, so we've got like oral blackface now. It's like, it's a little bit kind of, yeah. So yeah, it's a big question. I think it's something we all need to think about as we move forward. Yeah. Anyone else?
Someone who's so hyper of sound, what's the most jarring jingle in Japan?
Jarring jingle, just one. I do have a couple that are pretty traumatic for me. Like, and then they're so traumatic that I they're very deep down. Like I need to hear it to kind of to remember it. But I'm just trying to think like, often it's like the places you spend the most time in. And for me, like somewhere like Hard Off or Book Off or whatever, things like the Hard Off song just kind of like really get to me, I think. But so I kind of like it, but like it's at the same time, it's like when I'm there, it's just like I just wish they would stop this 30-second jingle from looping the whole time. What's another one? I mean, like I just find like jingles in Japan are so fucked. It's like kind of like the like what is that? The Battle Hymn to the Republic or something? And it's fucking like Yodobashi Kamura's song. It's like what's that? Yeah, can you imagine like the Civil War? When that song was meant to be sung and paraded, and it's fucking like you get this bastardized version of it at Yodobashi Kamura. It's just such a weird world. So there's things like that, like, yeah, jarring, I guess, yeah. Maybe not jarring, but like things like that just kind of make me go, yeah, this is pretty fucked. I've got a lot, but yeah, basically like Hard Off, Book Off, I think, probably pretty intense, yeah. If I think of one, I'll let you know. Just hoping like that doesn't pop up as a reference for a future job kind of thing. Like, yeah, we really want something that sounds like a Yodobashi Kamura song. Anyone else? Yeah. Did I? Wow.
Because I could see this dot here or there. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh wow. I did not know about that. No. Yeah. I mean. Yeah, that's a great question. It wasn't intentional, but I don't know. I like space, and I think like you need. Like when you're thinking about something as important as this, like you kind of need the space to think about it. But it's boring with just nothing, so I put a dot. And so it's kind of interesting you picked up on that because the dot is kind of a recurring motif, and motifs that recur are very important in music. So you might see it kind of moves around, and yeah, there it is again. Yeah. Anyone else? Alessa. Okay. Question about field recording. I usually, when I hear an interesting sound, I record it. But also, when I don't hear an interesting sound, I record it as well. So, just kind of whenever I have the opportunity to, I think. I think it's very important for field recording to record without, thinking about it too much. So, and that's another really interesting thing about field recording is that like when you record something, record where you are, and then you listen to that recording in a different space at a different time. You don't remember it. You don't remember it sounding like that a lot of the time. You might remember specific sounds that you heard, but it's very different. It's a different experience to what you remember it sounding like. And for me, that's a really huge part of field recording. So, and I know that, so I don't always discriminate about what I field record. It's just I just record, and then that's what it is. Yeah, good question. Anyone else? What do I? specifically for Japanese clients and that kind of thing? The question was about working with sound in Japan with Japanese clients. There is like this thing here about kind of striving for like 100%, 110% perfection kind of thing, and that's not always what I'm about. So it's kind of been a bit of a learning experience for me, kind of working with people that don't settle for less than 100%. I kind of feel like that's sometimes aiming for perfection gets the opposite result. I think like there's a really, what I really love about living and working here is like there's a big culture about artisanry and that kind of thing, and a lot of bespoke products and that kind of thing. And like when someone has created something bespoke or something unique and beautiful, it's always kind of backed by like a really, really interesting vision and like a story and that kind of thing. And I've worked with a lot of clients that like really respect the role of sound and that kind of thing, and really have clear ideas about how music should play a part and that kind of thing. That is kind of very different from where I'm from, which is, I'm from a culture of just kind of like, whatever, it's just should be right. It's been kind of, it's been nice to sort of rise to the occasion, I guess. Like, I don't know. It's another kind of big question, but yeah, generally sort of like the word artisanry comes to mind a lot for Japan. Yeah. That's it, I think.